Hi, welcome back. We're the Book Mavens. I'm Rachel. This is Amanda, and today we're going to be discussing Book 8 in the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik, which is Blood of Tyrants. So, we are back with Lawrence and Temeraire on a ship.
They're supposed to be going from Brazil to China.
Mm-hmm. Bad things happen. Storm. Lawrence goes over and then washes up on the shore of Japan and doesn't remember what the past 10 years of his life. He remembers who he is. He still thinks he's like a naval captain.
He thinks he's the captain of the boat where we first met him.
Yeah. So he has lost all of his time with Temeraire. Does not remember Temeraire at all. So that is where we're at with Lawrence. Temeraire, meanwhile, the storm has passed. He's been frantically looking for Lawrence. He believes he's still alive. Everyone else on the ship thinks he's dead and is trying to convince him, all right, we need to do what we can to leave and continue on. And sucks Lawrence is gone, but oh well, too bad, so sad. And he's having none of it. And so they end up, of course, later on in the book, having a big confrontation. And then once again, Lawrence still at this point in time, even when he is rejoined with Temeraire, does not remember who he is. And we get to see him kind of experience bonding with a dragon again. And then we end up in Russia. Now, overall, I don't think this book needed to be written as a separate book. I think there are elements in here, if you wanted to, you could have connected it to other things. Did I need Lawrence to have amnesia to further the plot or provide any other character development? No, not really, because turns out even with amnesia, Lawrence still makes the same decisions he would have made without amnesia. So I did not see this as something that really furthered the plot very much.
Well, and usually even like we've talked even in the past, like when we didn't really care for necessarily the plot, like the depressed Lawrence, but there's a purpose. Yeah, there's character development, but there really was there's no character development in either Temeraire or Lawrence in this book. It just is a lot of emotional pain and angst for Temeraire, really, because there's even a point because Lawrence has forgotten their bond. He suggests to Temeraire that Temeraire leave him behind, and doesn't understand the emotional fallout of that. It's just a lot of angst and pain for Temeraire in this book, really. And Lawrence, still ends up being the Lawrence that he was.
He still chooses Temeraire, even when he doesn't remember. He's like, oh, well, of course, I'll stay.
And his memory does eventually return. So it really just causes him to rehash all those feelings again. And I'm not really sure. There wasn't any substantive growth to his character. So it really just felt like for the first half of the book, he's just wandering around. Amnesia Lawrence. He's just wandering around and it doesn't really get us anywhere because I don't really...
Maybe this is just a way to explore Japanese culture with their dragons. Can we take that? Maybe that's the takeaway, that we just got a new cultural experience.
True.
Dragons being treated differently.
So in Japan, the dragon, I will say I did enjoy that, as we always do when we meet a new culture of dragons. In Japan, they seem to be kind of a cross between the Chinese model and maybe the Incan model, because they're venerated. Yes. A lot of the nobility titles are actually given to dragons, but they also have a kind of a cooperative with the humans.
Even the African one as well.
So they
have positions of power.
They're much more venerated, and they help the people, but they're not working for an income. At one point, there's a river dragon who gets flagged down by this little village because there's a frost and they need help warming the water to basically keep their crops from being frozen. And so she sees their flags and kind of pulls out of the river and helps them. And then they have a big feast for her. But that was the expectation. They were just trying to get the attention of any dragon, not an assigned it wasn't a job. She stopped to help because they asked, kind of thing.
They're almost treated a little bit like what you would see with minor gods, this idea that they're waiting and they're hoping for them to come and help them. There's a slight worship feel to it a little bit without being overly
without like the
like
level
with
of
a capital
the,
G God
or the
deal.
celestial kind of version that you
Right.
saw in China. So kind of across there. So it was interesting on that front, as always, to get to see a new culture. And you actually got two in this book, because the second half of the book, once Lawrence and them reach Russia, we get to see the way the Russians interact with their dragon populations, which is
garbage.
Yeah.
Garbage.
The worst we've seen by far.
Mm-hmm.
They basically
well, they're feared
yeah.
by most of the kind of like poor Russians, the peasantry.
Which I think
they are terrified.
Which I will say for not invalid reasons.
Well,
but not
necessarily
kind of valid reasons, but also they kind of
created
the problem.
Yeah.
Because he talks, okay, so basically if the dragons refuse to go into harness service, which they only want the heavyweights, anything like even really middle or lightweight, they basically just turn into a scavenger. They actually hobble them so that they can't fly and keep them basically starving away in the breeding grounds. And I mean, it is horrible treatment. It is awful. And so they are starving. And so at one point when some of them like escape, they eat people. They eat anything they can find because that's how hungry they are. Mm-hmm. And so in one hand, the Russians created their own problem. Like, you treated them like that and put them in that circumstance, but then they're afraid of them because these ones they've heard stories of how they eat people. So they've kind of created this own self-fulfilling prophecy with them. But their treatment of them is just horrendous. And the way that they get them into battle is not because of trust or mutual respect. They basically give them a hoard of gold, and then they say, I won't protect it if you don't go do this thing, or or I won't give you any more. They basically just kind of try to guilt/punish them, cajole them into things. And like, it's a very different attitude from any of the other cultures that we've interacted with. Because even the British, who look at them more as a tool to be used, don't treat their dragons like that. Like, they're not cruel or inhumane in the way that this culture.
Unless you're Rankin.
Yeah, unless you're Rankin.
But he at least learned.
But even that. Yeah. But here's the thing. But even that dragon was fed.
He was.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, these dragons are. Because even the worst of the worst is still substantially, which is a sign to you of how bad it is.
Yeah, it's not good, and it's really difficult because they're in a hard position there because they're allied with Russia to try and better the situation for the Russian dragons without losing an alliance. So there's a lot of kind of fine political.
Because Napoleon has pushed into Russia, and that's kind of the battle catalyst for all of this. Is that Lawrence, who is commanded by the emperor to take the Chinese dragons and go, do this thing. Which again, we get to see that because the general that is assigned to him is a dragon.
Yes.
And like, I did love the scenes where Lawrence is like, we're like, oh, well, finally, where's your Chinese general? He's like, this guy. And they're like, it takes him a minute. And it's kind of, those scenes are kind of great. But this book just felt like it kind of wandered around a lot in the plot. And as much as I did love getting two cultures in a book and not just one, it just, I'm kind of with Rachel.
It just didn't add anything overall. I didn't feel as connected with Lawrence and Temeraire. I just didn't see a lot of growth. Because I don't mind. I mean, we know after reading Hob, we don't mind living with characters through the ins and outs of the day. But you still didn't get that here. Like, it just didn't. It didn't feel necessary.
And he does eventually get his memory back. So that's. I'm just not sure. I will say there was no revelation. There was no the only thing I can think of is that Temeraire did learn that he can live without Lawrence.
He can, yeah.
He just really hates it and doesn't want to. But like, he did learn to operate independent of Lawrence's counsel.
But he already did that.
But as I say, but like,
that's already been done.
He's done it. He just had to do it at a deeper level in this one. Oh, although I will say, Ishkirka has the egg.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So they did leave us in an earlier book with like, basically Temeraire had finally given in. She wore him down, but you didn't know if it,
No, you didn't know if it had taken.
If it had worked. Yeah, if it had worked. But she announces on the shipwreck early in the book, like, well, the egg's coming in a day or two, which she uses as her excuse to basically not do anything.
As she would.
Listen, if not on the one hand, if you're about to give birth, I guess, as it were.
You should milk every second of it.
That's fine, but it just, in true Escarica fashion, she's not much. And they end up leaving the egg in China with the prince, because the prince's dragon was poisoned in an assassination attempt. So there's some internal struggles within China about who should rule, because the emperor is very old and ill.
And a ruler has to have a celestial.
And a ruler has to have a celestial. So
there's only 8.
Yeah. So despite May and Temeraire giving it a grand old try,
we don't hear anything
which
now.
Escarica, Caddy Escarica is.
She's something.
She's such a piece of work, Escarica.
She really is.
But Escarica's, they end up leaving Escarica and Temeraire's egg with them. And so the egg is hopefully going to be bonded to the prince, Lawrence's brother. And that's kind of where they leave you on that front. So that part was kind of, in terms of the plot, it did take, guys, there is an egg. And you know how the dragons feel about the egg, so.
It just felt like, with everything that was happening, they just could have tacked it on to the other books. Like,
right.
You just could have made the other books a little longer by maybe like 30 to 50 pages. I would say maybe max 100 pages of this book needed.
I don't even know why the Japanese section is there, because
I think it's just a culture, just to explore another culture.
Maybe it'll come up later. I don't know. This book did feel like it just kind of wandered around, and I don't like Amnesia Lawrence as a character, because
but there was a funny part.
Oh yeah. Okay, I will say
really
it was
really
very entertaining, because in earlier books, you remember, like, Lawrence's parents think that Emily must be his. Well, he goes through that all again in his mind. He's like, well, I got a chaperone for her and she's with me, but how could I have done that? And what's happening? So then he has to ask Temeraire, and there's like this moment of relief when Temeraire's like, Lawrence, that's not possible because blah, blah, blah. And he's like, but then immediately Temeraire says, but you and Jane. And that was hilarious. That was funny to see Lawrence go through that all over again. And again, Lawrence is exactly the same person he's always been. He's like simultaneously confused and disappointed by himself. He doesn't know. He doesn't know how he
Nobody
got there.
self-castigates like Lawrence.
That's true.
So, I mean, like, yeah. He definitely put himself through some unnecessary paces.
Angst.
Yeah.
I get Lawrence on that front.
And we still love him. I mean, we still love Lawrence. Lawrence, in all of these books, is never really the problem. I mean, like...
No, I love Lawrence. Yeah. Honestly, okay, guys, this is a popular opinion, or unpopular opinion, is where I have for a very long time had a literary crush on John Watson. You know, from the Sherlock Holmes. Like, that is... I love that character. I love the, whatever. Lawrence is definitely... I think he's overtaken in my heart. I think he's my #1 literary crush.
Captain Wentworth?
I know, right? Because here's the thing, I never got to see Captain Wentworth interact with an animal. Lawrence is kind. In the first book, when he's like, no, you treat them well. Like, he's a good steward, and that appeals to Farm Amanda. Amanda grew up on a farm, and that appeals to me.
He's a good egg. Oh, Lawrence.
Oh, I like him. Well, and that's really it. That's all we got to say.
That's all we got for this one. We just didn't love it. So we didn't feel like there was any major plot development happening. No real character development. We're just kind of there.
We're just not really sure what it was for yet.
No, not really.
Or if we will ever be. I don't know.
So join us next time when we talk about the last book in the series. Right here, League of Dragons, book 9. And we'll see what kind of trouble Temeraire and Lawrence get into in this one. See you next time.
Bye.